Welcome to Fast Track, brought to you by Aera, the podcast where we help you get into your first home faster. I'm Cheree Kinnear with Aera founder Derek Handley. In this episode, we take a look at the latest housing market news, what we can learn from our parents' spending habits, and the mindset shift you need to know to buy your first home. Well, Derek, shall we get into it?
Absolutely.
So one of the headlines that actually really caught my eye in the last few weeks has been around Kiwis going overseas, so moving to live and work overseas. So a recent study by Southern Cross Travel Insurance found 75% of Kiwis aged between 18 and 44, so quite a big range, would consider moving overseas. Of all the departing Kiwis, 35% were aged between 18 and 30. But what was really interesting was we're at an all-time high level of migration for those in between their 30s and 40, so a slightly older demographic. So first of all, I guess, what are your thoughts around it? Why do you think so many more Kiwis in that age group specifically are going overseas?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, that's quite a sad statistic, right? Because those people are often in their prime in terms of work, learning, growing, raising a family. It's quite sad and it's frightening that those groups want to leave New Zealand. I guess partly, it's the kind of things that people have been commenting on, that maybe people are not confident on what their future here holds, and that the cost of living in comparison to what they earn is not what they might get elsewhere. The cost of housing and things like that have always been on the back burner are still, although they're a little bit easier now, always still difficult. It is a bit of a worrying stat that age group wants to leave, because normally that's the age group that I think people start coming back.
They've done like an OE, they've gone overseas for work in a few
So the younger ones is not a big surprise. That seems to be normal. Like, a lot of people have done that for decades. But leaving in your mid-30s or even in your 40s is almost like you might not come back, or you may come back to retire or something, and that's also this hugely productive part of the workforce, and also the people who shape the communities that we live in and that start taking leadership positions on all range of things,
Because I think for a lot of young people, they go overseas maybe in their 20s to work for a few years, save a bit more money. But a lot of people do like to come back to New Zealand to have a family and raise their kids here.
Yeah.
In that sort of 30s to 40s age bracket, they might already have kids or be at that point in their life. So I guess, as you said, it does sort of ring alarm bells in the sense, are they moving overseas to then start family over there?
Yeah.
But how beneficial do you think it is for people if you're going to go overseas and you say, I'm going to live there for 5 years, save a bit of money and come back? Do you think that's actually worth it? Like, are you actually going to make decent enough gains that it's worth doing?
I think there's a lot of evidence that certain parts of Australia, for example, in the mining communities, people can make a huge amount of money and the cost of living is low. If you're going to a big metropolis like New York or London, I think it's a lot harder, right? Because the cost of living there is also really high. You might earn a bit more, but it's not cheaper to live there. So I lived in New York and LA and Hong Kong, and eventually came back to, raise a family. You can earn more money there, but you can also spend it 100 times faster than you spend it in New Zealand. So it's kind of it's got pros and cons. Like, also people that live in London, lots of Kiwis live there. They blast through a lot of money traveling through Europe constantly because it's so easy and it's at their doorstep. So if you're going to go overseas with a plan of coming back to build a family here, without a plan, you may end up not saving the kind of money that you thought you were originally going to. You know what I mean?
Did you be quite thoughtful and clever about
I think so.
how you do it?
Because a lot of people go over with no clear idea of what's going to happen afterwards, which is totally fair. But I have a lot of friends that they aren't really coming back, and they've decided that it's too difficult, it's too expensive to buy a house. They're already set up where they are, whether it's in the US or the UK. And they've decided, maybe if I do come back, it's going to be when I'm much, much older.
Speaking of, the next story actually touches on retirement. So the Retirement Commission released new data this month that shows the breakdown of KiwiSaver balance broken up between age and gender. New Zealanders, on average, across the board, have around $37,000 in their KiwiSaver. But what was most concerning about this story, and what was really highlighted in the headline too, was the age bracket of 61 to 65-year-olds only had around $69,000. Now, if you're retiring with that amount, I guess what that really paints a picture for is if you're in the mindset of being someone who's like, I'm going to rent for the rest of my life, but it's the point of buying a house, 69 grand, that's not really a lot when you actually need to be putting money in rent and other things, right? Like, that's not going to get you far.
No, it's not going to get you far at all. If most I guess financial advisors would say you kind of going to get a 5 or 7% return on your money And so if you had $1 million saved, then you might get, 70 grand a year. We know that the median rent at the moment is in the high 600s, which on its own is 30 grand rent now. And in 20 years, that's probably going to be more like 80,000 a year for a median rent. So if you've got a family, and say you're in the 20s now, and in your 40s, you're going to need a family size home, you'll be paying 80,000 a year in rent if you're the median family. So the nature of what people have in KiwiSaver at the moment is totally woeful. Like, it's not sufficient to retire well in New Zealand. And that's, one of the key reasons why we started Aera was, having a home and getting it earlier will give you a much different profile of what it will look like to retire and be comfortable as you get older. Because obviously what New Zealand has been doing so far, New Zealanders in KiwiSaver, is not anywhere near enough. And Super, which you can get when you're however old, 65 or something, they'll basically pay for your groceries, right? I think it's about, it's $10 to $20,000 per person. If you're a couple, you might get 25. So it's really nominal. It's quite shocking that age group doesn't have that much money, but they also probably haven't spent their entire working life saving it, because KiwiSaver has not been around for, say, 50 years, like it has in, say, Australia.
Quite different in 20 years from now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we know that the median or average KiwiSaver for like someone at, say, 30 is more like 22K per person, which is why if there's two of them, they might have something like 40, which means they would only be 20 to 30K away from a first home 10% deposit, which is what we think is really important to focus on. So we know that the younger group have more, probably because they've started at the beginning of their working career.
Mm-hmm. And then when I guess you look at the age breakdown, it makes sense that maybe 40s and 50s have a bit less because they've maybe taken out the KiwiSaver to put into a home, and they're kind of going back.
100%
a few of those variables, right?
Yeah, but you were thinking about a higher 60s age group?
Yeah, but if you look at the breakdown in the report, sort of age to age, it kind of makes sense that there's a bit of a dip at one point. Because
yes.
Assuming people have used it for a home.
Yeah, so there's a whole, I guess, generation. I don't know how many years it's been that people have been using it for their first home. And then it goes down, and then I guess you have to recontribute to it. So that still underscores the argument that, well, you're saving for retirement, and then at some point you're going to give a massive whack into the KiwiSaver. It's going to go somewhere close to zero, and you have to rebuild it again. Mm-hmm. So again, the earlier you do that, the more time you're giving for your KiwiSaver to build back up again.
Absolutely.
So if you pull it down when you're 50, you've given it very low chance to actually build up again.
Our next bit of news is quite exciting for yourself and for the Aera team. So a new book is about to drop, written by yourself and the team at Aera, and it's the first book to really lay out like how to get into your first home faster, breaks down like the systems, and like really unpacks it really clearly. I've read the book. I've been lucky enough to be able to see it. And for me personally, it completely changed my mindset and sort of how I was viewing a home. And I could drivel off so many examples of the book that I was like, oh, I didn't think about that. Like getting into a new home, the 10% deposit stuff, a lot of that was a huge knowledge gap, even for myself. And I think so many people who were first home buyers. So first of all, do you want to tell me what was the inspiration behind writing this book and obviously getting that out to people?
The book, The Fastest Way to Your First Home, obviously building this company, we've talked to hundreds and hundreds of New Zealanders on how they're thinking about going into getting a first home. We also looked at the entire industry about how it's structured, from savings all the way through to getting mortgage, to buying a house, finding a house, and then insuring your income in your home. And through that process, basically I learned hundreds of things I didn't know at the beginning, which, to be honest, mostly they shocked me. They shocked me how the system works, how much commission comes out of the system, how the bank calculates what they're going to lend you or what they're not going to lend you based on kind of, dark art and science that no one understands. Like, what does a credit card do? What does a car loan do? These things were so mysterious. And I'm pretty financially literate. I have a degree in finance. I have a financial fund that invests in companies. Like, I know about money to a certain extent, but all of these things kind of really blew my mind. And so I thought it was really important to write a book and create content and tell stories that explains this is what it looks like from behind the scenes, behind the mirror. The more you understand this, the better you can give yourself a shot to figure out this first home. The second thing was the books that had been written were very kind of like basic stuff, which a lot of it's to do with the finish line. Like, what's a contract? How do you make an offer? How to go through thinking about whether this house is right for you, or how do you do a house inspection? All that stuff matters zero if you don't have a plan or the belief to figure out how you're going to get that first home. So those books were writing about this whole process, which is like, that's happening at the finish. What's missing is how does someone go from, I want to figure out how to get the first home, but I've got no idea. And that's why we wrote this book. It's like, this is a game plan. If you follow it, there's a way for you to think about how to get there.
Mm-hmm. And what I loved about it too is it's so easy. You can sit and read it within an hour. Like it's really, and it's so like well presented. The page, it's really interesting and engaging. Like it's not like, here, you got to go read this massive boring wordy book on how to get to your first home. And I kind of have referred to a little bit about like your first home Bible almost. Like you just whip it open on a page, refresh your memory on something. It's just got all the top stuff you need to know. And,
So what are some of the stuff that you found most interesting?
well, I mean, again, the 10% thing. I
mean, meeting
think
a 10%.
Yeah, like, I mean, I was like, I think you can do, but I've always thought it was 20%. You needed at least 20%. Like, you'd struggle to get 10% across the line. So in my mind, I was like, okay, I'm still a while away from being able to get my first home. That was a big one, which then changing now was like, oh, actually, this is now way more achievable for me to do. The other thing that I was that changed my mind on was the Newville idea. So I was always like, oh, okay, you got to buy like a older house, go to options, like all the stuff off, so much admin. That's such a hard process to go through. And just like how much better it can be getting into your home, you get the 10% deposit with that. You don't have to go through an auction. You know what you're getting. It's like, there's not all these kind of hidden issues that might
Unknowns.
Unknowns with older houses. And I think also just the psychology. I was in the mindset probably of, oh, like, I'll get to the house eventually. That's top priority. Well, we'll just keep saving away. It's all good. Whereas I think it really opened my eyes to how important it is to go, actually, you need to really act on this, because the sooner you do, the better for the future.
If it's something you want and you believe it's part of your future, that's exactly right. Like, you've got to think about it as being a key goal and bringing it forward as far as possible. So just to be clear, the 10% thing to me was a giant unknown. So a couple of years ago, even when I started this journey, I had no idea. You hear about how you might get a loan from here or there. The whole entire media sector talks about 20% every time they talk about how long it takes to save for a house, how much you need, how difficult it is. And I had fallen into that trap until I found on the Reserve Bank website that there is a specific mandate that if someone is a first-time buyer and they want to buy a new home, they can buy it with 10% as long as it's a brand new home. And you can understand it. They're trying to incentivize a lower barrier for people to get into their first home, and they're trying to incentivize people to build more houses, because that, in the long run, is the only way we're going to have a lower house price. So that's why it makes sense when you look at it. Oh, it's not some discretionary thing that if you've got a nice banker, they might let you get away with 10%. Those are the actual rules. They can lend you the mortgage with 10% deposit as long as you're a first-time buyer and buy a brand new home. So I thought that was one massive truth bomb that most people don't know. And we did research on that. And, somewhere between 60 to 70% of Kiwis don't know that.
Had no idea.
No idea.
Yeah. And just again, like, not even saying from like just personally, like really changed my perspective, and cannot recommend enough for anyone to read it. If people want to get their hands on the book though, just quick plug where can
so it should be dropping in, most retail stores in early May. And obviously if you're an Aera member or saving with us, we'll be doing some campaigns during April. And I think we're going to be dropping some books around town and doing lots of promos and doing fun things to explain and get the book out. Yeah.
Keep your eyes peeled.
Exactly. Right. As you said, it's super fun, right? It's a picture book. Well, not bringing anywhere.
So not someone that's into reading or something like reading a book is like intimidating to you. You can absolutely get through this. Our next section is Fast Track Flashback, where we take a look on how the housing market has changed, look back on the past, what we can learn today. So I want to talk a little bit about, again, like the generational gap, baby boomers, older, our current generation versus millennial, Gen Zs, people now in that sort of first home buyer category. Now, we know that we've always heard the whole argument of like our parents had it easier, and it has obviously been proven. We look at the difference between income and house prices. It was easier for them. But what I want to talk about today is, do you think that the generation that we view saving differently or spending differently, or is there a mindset shift? And is there something that we can maybe learn from our parents' generation on how they viewed saving for a home?
Yeah, I think there's no doubt that they had it easier in the sense that the ratios were totally different, right? What you earned versus what the house cost. Their savings, it's not really to do with them, let's say. Let's look at the context of what it was like to grow up in those days. How many distractions did you have living in New Zealand? There was a lot less to do. There was a very simple life. I mean, even the number of restaurants or activities you could go on, in the 80s and up to the 90s, it was really, really simple. It was harder to travel. You know, we're in the middle of like the bottom of the earth, very expensive to get around on planes. Not a lot of people, you know, are flying all ins and outs into Auckland Airport. You didn't have the internet and social media constantly distracting you with things that you think you want or things that you want to spend your money on. And we're now in a world where basically the more time you spend online, the more you could get distracted into just spending money. Like the phone that you've got in the pocket is essentially a machine that's designed to convince you to part with more and more money every day, right? Whether it's Uber Eats, buying on Amazon, shopping online, and all of that small stuff just adds up to many, many, many micro habits of money just leaving, you know, your wallet, which in the olden days, you had to be way more thoughtful, even to the point when I think this is a really, really powerful point, which is like, if you have cash, which is what the society was back then, you have to manually hand over what you'll spend it, right? Whereas at the moment, it's purely digital. Money just moves in characters on your phone. It's so much easier to ship $200 over on the phone by pushing some buttons. But actually, if I asked you to hand me $200, it's psychologically very different.
Yeah, I've heard that as a saving tip. Like
Yeah.
raw cash for the week, and you're way more reluctant to give it out.
Yeah, and also it's kind of a budgeting tip. Like if you walk around with $500 and you have that for the week. I mean, nobody does this, but it would mean that you know how much you've got, right? Whereas digitally, it's quite a lot harder unless you're pretty organized. So they're living in a context where it's actually not anywhere near as easy to spend money. So it makes it much harder for this generation to be more thoughtful about, well, how do I protect my money? What do I do with it? You know? So it's just different. Although now we have the software and technology where you can automatically move your money and say, I want to move it to this account or that a savings account and not touch it. But you have to kind of set those things up, you know? And that's why at Aera we have these savings accounts where the idea is that you just decide that's where you're going to save for your deposit. It's got high interest rates, and then you basically don't look at it. You know, you don't look at it when you're spending your money.
And you just got me thinking too about paying for convenience as well nowadays. You mentioned like Uber Eats, for instance, and stuff. I mean, I didn't have that back then. You couldn't put some money towards someone going and getting it for you. So I can imagine that that's another whole element for the younger generation.
Yeah, and it's not just that. It's anything, right? You can buy stuff from Amazon. You can buy movies and Netflix. Like, so say you subscribe to all these channels. Like if you're on Apple or Amazon Prime, you can still pay more, buy newer movies, and you can get them instantly, right? So there's just everything on demand, which is just a way for you for money to be sucked out of your wallet.
So what we can learn is to maybe how we can simplify like for a little bit or our spending and like finding, I guess, like living a little bit simpler, right?
I think so. Maybe finding ways to simplify how you're spending.
Yeah.
Being maybe much more thoughtful about what you are willing and not willing to spend on, particularly between what your needs and your wants are. So like what it costs to just live versus what you're spending discretionary, without really thinking about it and deciding, actually, I only want to spend this amount this month on these kinds of things. You'll just end up spending it all, you know, on various stuff and not tracking it. So finding a way to be more thoughtful about where the money goes, maybe.
In the last segment for today's episode, we're going to take a look at mindset. And do you want to talk to me a little bit about some research that's around the mental approach to things that seem impossible and out of reach? Because for a lot of people, first home and a house in general, it does seem like something that's just too far down the track to even think about.
Yeah, so I think one of the key things about this 10% unlock that we focus on is that it can change someone's mindset that what they thought previously was not possible is possible. And, you know, you and I go out on the street and interview lots of people, and people think, oh, the average house is $1 million, you need 20%. That's 200,000. I'm never going to get it. I'm just going to spend my money traveling and living a good life. And then you show them something and say, well, you could buy a house for 700,000 or 650 and you need 10%. Oh, that's only 65. And then it becomes all of a sudden much more real to them, right? So there's this researcher called Roy Baumeister who did a series of studies in the 80s, and he described an effect called the what the hell effect, which is basically saying once someone realizes or thinks that a goal is totally unattainable, then they immediately kind of give up. And it's exponentially more difficult for them to come back into believing it's possible. And so what they've effectively done, once they've either been convinced by the media or by themselves, or often in this example, by their peers, that no, that's not possible, you're not going to be able to buy a first home, then they move it into this abandoned kind of category of things where, well, I'm not going to do that. So then what the hell? Why don't I? borrow money and buy a jet ski, spend my money on holidays, buy all the nice things I want because I don't need to save for that deposit. So that psychology, once you've given up, it's very hard to get back on. And so part of the job that we have at Aera is to convince people, no, you actually can. There are lots of different ways to do it, and you might be in a situation where it might be very hard. But for most people in the average family, you can. So that's one of the things we we want to avoid people from getting into. I'd say a lot of New Zealanders are already in that position. They've given up.
Yeah.
Another aspect of it is when you're saving for a deposit or when you're setting a goal. There's another piece of research by a guy called Navsiger in maybe like 10 years ago. And his research was around if you set a goal that's too hard, like, for example, I want to save 30,000 this year for a deposit, and you start failing and you start missing that target, you're about 40 to 55% more likely to give up. So it's a similar psychological effect. If you set a goal that's too hard and you start missing it, then you start having the same effect of the Baumeister effect, which is like, oh, what the hell? I'm not making it. So I might as well just use that money and buy a jet ski.
Yeah.
So these two sets of research indicate that it's quite important to not fall into the trap of giving up. And then if you are setting goals, that they need to be somewhat, they need to avoid having the risk of you kind of missing them out to such a point where you start giving up. And in the next episode, we'll go through a whole array of tactics and ways to deal with those two scenarios so that you can be prepared and best set up to be, you're up against these kind of psychological things that are challenging you. So you want to prepare yourself to not be in those traps. And we're going to share a bunch of tips next episode on how to do that.
Amazing. Looking forward to it. Like,
really
that
fun.
was my next question. I was like, I need to know how to do this. I think,
Yeah.
And there's so many ways you can do it. And for some people, it's easier than others. Like the whole goal setting. Like some people just are way more driven.
Yeah.
with that. But for a lot of people, it's a huge challenge. So
Yes.
it's really important to find ways to be like, for those people that are really stuck in that mindset of like, I don't even know where to start, like how we can make that really easy to break it down. So
Yeah, and avoid them from slipping backwards if a unexpected hiccup occurs, because if we've done the research, we know the science. If something happens, half the people are likely to fall off the wagon. Well, they've also done the research of what can you do before you start to avoid that, and that's what we'll share.
Awesome. Thanks, Cheree. We'll stay tuned for that
Yeah.
last chat. Thank you so much for joining us. If you made it this far, thank you for listening. Make sure you follow and subscribe if you liked this episode. You can tag us on socials and send this to a friend, partner, or anyone that might be looking to buy their first home. We'll catch you next time on Fast Track.